Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Rob Ashton. Rob is a returning guest, and you might remember him from back on episode 105. Rob is a writer who focuses on the hidden brain science on how the things we read and write influence what we think and do. Now, he's been researching the science behind the process of reading and writing for more than 7 years. Rob is also the founder of the global learning company Emphasis, where he specializes in written communication and has thus far enabled over 80,000 people to make more impact with their professional writing. In his estimation, much of the written communication of leaders simply doesn't work, and I'm excited to have him back on the show to talk about the importance of the written word in leadership. So, Rob, welcome back to the show.
John, it's great to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I had to get you back because I really felt like we just scratched the surface of this important issue. In fact, when I first had you on the show, I didn't anticipate the kind of response I'd have to the show and the I would say the learning I had throughout the discussion, because I think that we take the written word for granted often. Is that what you typically think with leaders?
I think we all do. I think we've become ever more reliant on the written word, but without realizing it. It's the example I always give is, if my phone rings, I assume something's wrong. And, despite the fact it's called a phone, we very rarely use it for speaking. And what are we doing when we're not speaking? And we're not watching cat videos. We're using it for writing. We just don't think of it as writing. So it's hidden in plain sight. And if my memory serves me right, we sent and received an estimated 339 billion emails every single day last year, and that figure's gone up since we last spoke, because it's an annual rise of 20 billion a day. So it's huge. We write all the time. We just don't see it.
Yeah, and it's in everything that we do. And we talked last time about the fact that we were in the middle of the pandemic, and so a lot of it went towards a lot of writing, a lot more email, a lot more text messages, a lot more Slack channels, and all that is writing. All that is, and we don't even think about it, but it is the written word, and it's something that is I don't say it definitely, we talked about last time, there can be translation issues on the front and the back end of the written word, and that's part of our challenge and things that we have to watch out for when it comes to writing.
Yeah, so it's the trouble is that when we write, we're playing a backing track in our heads, so we can, and it's a bit like when you listen to your favorite music in your ear with your earbuds. You can hear this backing track and you sing along, and it sounds amazing to you because you can hear the backing track, but it sounds awful to everybody else. I'm sure your singing doesn't sound awful, John, but and that the same thing is happening when we're writing. Writing is actually, it's something we didn't evolve to do. We've only been doing it as a species for 5,000 years, and for most, for all but the most recent 200 years, most of the human race wasn't using writing. So it only became widely available 200 years ago. That's nowhere near enough time to evolve any changes in the brain to accommodate it. So it's just something that we do through joining together parts of the brain that we evolved for other things. Not just sight, not just vision, but hearing, and even voice production. When we're reading, the fast twitch muscles of the larynx are vibrating, even though we're not aware of it and we're not actually reading out loud. So all these parts of the brain are joined together, lots of other parts too, and it's an awful lot going on. Now, it's kind of an illusion reading, because reading and writing, because when you're writing, you have all of that going on, but you have this backing track, you have all of your thoughts, you have the context, you have what's important in your life today, what, if you're a leader, what's, what pressure you're under, and you bring all of that context to bear when you're writing, but the reader usually doesn't get to see or hear that backing track at all. What they get is a series of dots and squiggles on a screen, which they then have to use this brain hack, if you like, to translate back into a voice in their head. It's probably not the same voice that you had in your head when you were writing. and they don't have the backing track. So I think when you think of it that way, it's really a miracle that it ever works. You know, it's kind of it's an accident waiting to happen, and the fact we've become reliant on this what is essentially a new technology, and
Yeah.
I don't mean the smartphone, I mean the written word. You know, it's amazing, and enabled us to do wonderful things, but it's not surprising that things get a little lost in translation sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. When you explain it that way, it makes sense to me. I think of 30 years of, in a leadership role, and I think of the number of times there's been miscommunication and there's been conflict because of it, or something doesn't get done because of it, and it was all because there was a different track being played by the writer and the reader, and the translation just didn't work. I meant for you to do this. Well, I didn't know you meant that. I did this, which was completely different. And I saw that a lot throughout my career, and I never really thought about the idea of, you've got a writer on one side with a track, and you've got a reader on the other side with a different track, and a lot of times that doesn't connect. So I was thinking about this. What how should leaders, as we're talking about communicating with people to try to get things done, right, coordinate activities, do difficult things in the world, how should we be thinking about the written word as leaders?
This is not a very helpful answer, but it's a huge topic, and there is no one size fits all. But I think the first thing is to be aware of how different it is, and that is, that's a pretty good start. Just that awareness, being aware that you are using a suboptimal method of communication for the human brain, not for time management, not for communicating with people in different time zones, not for communicating to lots of people in one go. It's great for all of those things. But when it comes to just getting a thought from one human brain to another, the written word is suboptimal. It is, you are at a disadvantage. Yes, use it. I'm like anybody else. I write far more than I speak, especially in a professional context. Although we even seem to text message my kids here in the house. We've just all become, and I think especially with Gen Z as well. It's kind of like, why are you speaking to me? Can you not send me a message?
Right.
But I think with leaders, you've got to kind of break things down, and you've got to say, okay, right, what's the best thing you can do is to try to imagine what it's like to receive your message. Now, that's very difficult because I've said, you're playing this backing track in your head, your own backing track. So you've got to find a way to stop that backing track. That we read through expectation, through prediction. Okay, so the reason we can read so quickly is because it's 90% hallucination. It's 90% what we're expecting to see,
Mm.
and that's especially true when you're reading what you've written, because of course you know what you've written, you wrote it, so, and you've just written it, so of course you know what you're saying, in scare quotes. The person reading it will, yes, they'll have their own backing track, but they'll be predicting too, so they'll have their own agenda. They could be anywhere. They could be upset, they could be stressed, they probably are, certainly probably got too much on, and so they'll be skim reading, and they'll be predicting. They won't be seeing what's there, they'll be seeing what they expect to see. What happens in the brain, as far as we can tell so far, is that the eye can't take in, the structure of the eye is not complex enough to take in all the things we see generally. So we have these mental models, we have this expectation, the things we expect to see, and nowhere is that more important and evident than when it comes to reading. So what actually happens is the brain creates an error signal. It looks at what it sees, and it looks at what it expected, and it matches the two, and it says, what's different? And then that's the bit that gets sent to the visual cortex. So when you're writing to someone, you need to know that you're not going to you're not it's going to be very, very difficult to anticipate how it will be received, and what's actually there. So you need to disconnect the soundtrack. You need to disconnect your soundtrack. You need to do everything you can to lower the amount of the extent to which you're using expectation and prediction. And you can do that by you can do that by reading it out loud, because that slows down the reading process, and means that expectation is less of a factor. You can use a screen reader to read it. I mean, you sound extreme, okay? But, and I'm not saying you do this for every message, but it's really important, do some of these. Print it out, okay? Not very eco-friendly, but you could try sending it to yourself as an email, and maybe looking at it on your phone instead of on your laptop, or vice versa. So what you're doing is you're short-circuiting the expectation effect and making it look different. I mean, the best way to do it is time, because if you've forgotten what you wrote, then you're not going to be expectation is not going to be there as much. You're reading something much more in the way that the recipient would read it. So if you leaders are under pressure when you write something, you want to send it now, right? But if there's any way that you can not send it now and you can look at it tomorrow, you will have forgotten a lot of the context. You'll have probably have a different backing track in your head by then. And you've got a much better chance then of seeing it as the reader will see it.
I really like that. That's great advice. I know, like, one of the things I've always used is I like to use the audio. I'll play back a audio reader, and it's nice to just, and then you sort of sit back, don't look at the words, but listen to the voice, and you're all of a sudden you'll say, "Oh shoot, that doesn't make any sense at all," or "I'm missing a word here," or "I've got the wrong word here," and that's always been one. And like you said, we're changing the way we're looking. We're not looking at the words, we're hearing it, and then you might be able to catch something that you didn't expect. And I was going to say too, as a guy who wrote 3 books, I can tell you that I will look at a manuscript, and I don't find any errors, and I'll run it through like Grammarly or something, and I'll find all these errors. I'm like, where did those errors come from? I don't see it, because I knew, I was so familiar with the text that I couldn't see the errors in it. Like you were talking about, your brain, my brain filled in the blanks that were missing. And so I've seen that a lot in my own personal writing, is that your brain creates a model, and it's sort of like you said, it's seeing what's different from expectations. And if there's nothing there, you're good to go. And sadly, there are often errors in our own personal writing. We don't see it because our model says everything's perfect.
Just to add to that, the the it's like God's little joke. The things that are biggest, written in the largest typeface, those are the things the least likely to view accurately. And I think that it's because the area of fine focus on the retina, tiny, and there is a limit to how much how much information it can contain. If you're reading something in an 11-point font, you read that, and you can read, like, I don't know, sort of 7-8 letters, something like that. If you're reading it in 36-point font, you'll probably see, like, half of the letter T. It's kind of like, so you don't see it until it's there. Until you're delivering your PowerPoint presentation to an auditorium of 1,000 people, and then they can see it because they've got the distance. You can see it because you wrote it 2 weeks ago, and you're not so familiar with it. And it's only then that you spot your biggest errors. And we all do that. It's just once you dig into it, it's fascinating. I think so, anyway.
Yeah, I really do too as well. What would you say if you were saying some of the common mistakes that leaders make in written communication? What would some of those be, if you're just, spitballing some things that we should be watching out for?
I would say never ever email or write under the influence of emotion.
Mm.
That's the trouble is that we think on our screens at the moment in these days. We think on our laptops, on our phones, and when we are in that situation, we are solitary generally. It's a solitary activity. We're in our own little world, and we can get very irritated by things that may have nothing to do with what we're reading, and those will come to play when you're writing. So if you get an email, you get a message that annoys you, everything will be screaming, oh, I'm just going to reply. And I think one of the best disciplines you can develop as a leader is not to do that. Never ever to reply or write under the influence of emotion. I would say also, don't start with bad news. Don't start with if something needs to change, if something is happening that the other person isn't expecting and they might react negatively to it. Don't just go straight in with it. Don't say, I'm canceling leave next week. You've got to get people nodding first. And I'm not saying I'm not talking about burying the bad news. I'm not talking about hiding anything. But you've got to open the right folders in the brain first. If you don't start with the situation before you move on to what's changed, you need then it's like being punched in the face. You're never going to get a great reaction to that. So you need to just kind of set the context, if you like, and that runs counter to what we hear. It's all about, we're told it's all about efficiency. Use lots of bullet points. Just get the notes across. Write a subject line that makes sense on its own, which you should do, by the way. But you've got to remember that you are not just that it's a suboptimal method of communication, but that you are dealing with a human, and that you're dealing with another. That you're dealing with a human with all our human frailties, but you are communicating with another person. You are not on your own. It's a social or joint exchange. Whereas when we're writing, it's a solitary thing. So you think it's just you, and there's this person you're probably not even thinking about that much. So it's do everything you can to put yourself in the recipient's shoes. The third thing I'll add in is that you can get across far less information than you think you can in an email or a message, or even in a report, actually, because of this expectation effect, because of the prediction. And I've even noticed something just the other day on my company's website. And you think we would know better, but this is kind of really as a result of doing this extra research on prediction that I can see it differently now. But we were wondering why people were not going to the right web page. We ran two types of course, one aimed at teams and for companies, and one aimed at individuals. And if you look at the text on the website, it says, we run, if you're here for a course, and it's for training. If you're here for training for yourself, click here. If you're here for training for your team, click here. And the company gets lots of phone calls and emails from people saying, do you do training for individuals, or do you do training for teams? And it says it there. And colleagues said to me, how can we make that clearer? I mean, it does say explicitly, and yet people aren't seeing it. And the reason is both of those sentences start with the same words.
Yes.
If you are here for. There's this prediction thing. So we don't read, we scan, we skim, we pick up nuggets of information, and we fill in all the blanks. And so that's the third thing, is to remember that people are not reading, they're skimming, and they're probably not going to have read all that you've written. So don't get annoyed with them if they don't. It's just a human thing. And it's and that attention, that ability, that to read accurately, just goes. It's not great to begin with, but if someone's tired, hungry, stressed, then that just cuts down almost to zero. So it goes wrong all the time. But this is why. It's because we're human, and so just remember you're writing to a human being, even if,
I,
however much they've irritated you.
I love that. And I was just thinking, we didn't mention it last time, and I was thinking as you were talking, do we need to think differently when we're communicating one-on-one or when we're writing something to one person versus a group of people? Is there any thumb rules or things we should think about? Because I think it might be easy to put yourself in your listener's shoes or your reader's shoes, I should say, if you're doing a one-on-one type of thing. But if you're sending it out to a group, which I do a lot, I send a note to all my employees, right? And I think that I'm communicating in a way that everyone will understand. But are there anything that we should think about when you're sending to a group versus like an individual?
But I'd flip that. I would say when you're writing to a group, remember you're really writing to an individual many times.
Yeah.
It's not like, kind of go back to the days of the town square where a town crier would kind of ring a bell and ring out read out this scroll, to the assembled masses. It's you're writing to one person. You're writing to lots of individuals. They won't read it as a community. They'll read it on their own. And so, if you err on the side of writing to an individual, generally, then you won't go far wrong. It's kind of just imagine one person. I remember years ago doing radio training, and the trainers said, "Look, I know you might be speaking on the BBC, and there might be millions of people listening. I hope, I wish, but you are not doing that. You're speaking to one person in their kitchen or in their car. It's just one person. It's just a conversation with one person lots of times. And it's the same with writing. Just imagine you're writing to one person, even if you're writing to 200.
I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense, and that's certainly helpful. I wanted to switch gears a little bit. We've got something new out now that, and I know you've looked at it. I've looked at it as well. It's called ChatGPT. Um, tell us a little bit about what it is from your understanding of it, and what you've been learning as you've been playing around with it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, things are moving so quickly that there's a big danger that even if you publish this tomorrow, I'm going to be out of date.
It'll be outdated, right?
But as at the time of recording, it's this company called OpenAI. It's got a bunch of investors, including Elon Musk, and OpenAI has been working, developing a large language model, a text-based communication tool, or generative tool. That's what the G stands for. That produces text. Okay, and last November, the leadership, as I understand it, of OpenAI said to the developers, "We want you to develop a chatbot that uses this technology," and apparently gave them 2 weeks to do it. So they kind of did this almost as an experiment. And that went live at the end of November 2022, and within 5 days, it had got its first million users. And when I last checked, the estimates were that it had 100 million users. That was in January 23. Apparently, it's the most successful launch of any product in human history.
Wow.
The adoption curve on this thing is just, it's vertiginous. It just goes straight up. It's kind of, this thing. A lot of people are playing with it. It's easy to forget that a lot of people haven't heard of it yet, because that's always the way with new technology. But this really seems to have caught fire and captured people's imagination. And what this thing does is, you put in a query, a prompt, to use the term, the jargon, and it just generates a response. And it generates the response in a way that it's so realistic, John. You just cannot, you wouldn't guess that a bot wrote it. And this is not a chat bot that, such as you might see if you're contacting customer services, and you say, "My train was cancelled. Can I have a refund, please?" And you get one of 3 responses or something. This thing will write to you in 4 sentences. It will write 200-300 words. It will just spill out this narrative. And you can say, I want to write a report to my team on cost of living crisis or something like that, and it's like, can you write it? And it will say, sure. And it will write this passage, and you've told it nothing else. It's incredible. I mean, it's not perfect, and what it's doing essentially is making things up a lot of the time. So touch on that in a second, but I just kind of want to say one thing, which is that I've spent the last 25 years trying to persuade people to take written communication seriously.
Right.
And now we've got, and people have often said, oh yeah, I don't really get it. Are we writing that much? I don't know. Does it matter? Don't we speak to each other all the time? Can I have some presentation skills training? And then along comes this tech that writes for people, and it just just takes off completely blows up.
Yeah.
And I think that shows two things. One is that writing matters, and two, that writing is hard, and people want something that makes it easier. But yeah, I mean, what it does is I talked about as humans, when we read, we predict what's coming next, and what ChatGPT does is the same thing. It takes a word, and then it works out what the most common word is to come next. Then the most common word is, but it uses probability. It's like predictive texting on steroids. But it's garbage in, garbage out. If people complain, I've heard people say, well, I tried it and it was amazing, but when I looked at what it had written, it was a bit kind of plain vanilla. It was a bit there, really, it's kind of, it's nothing to set the world alight there. And that's the point, because without context, what it will do is base it on probability, which means the average. What does the average person say? What's the average kind of report? What's the average sentence that follows this sentence? And the average is probably a bit bland and a bit meh. It's kind of like so that's not surprising. But what you can do is you can program it. So as soon as you give it some context, as soon as you say, I have a team of 5 people. They have this level of experience. These are the things they are most interested in. I have to explain that they're not going to get a pay raise this year. Give me 5 things I should be sure to cover in my email. So you kind of use it as an outline, and it would probably do a pretty good job there. And then if you say, don't talk about this, focus on this bit, it will refine the list. And then you can say, write me an introduction that's going to get them on side. And then it will do that. And it's spooky. When you're looking at it, you think it's a human writing. And that's very dangerous. I mean, that's both amazing and very dangerous, because it's seductive, and you can think that it's a human writing, that it's a virtual assistant who's read your mind. And you have to remember, this thing can't even see you. It knows nothing. It knows nothing about you. And it's also amoral. It has no problem with making things up if it doesn't know them. So I was researching a blog post the other week, and I said, give me 5 papers on the language used, on the psychology of language in dating profiles, and it said, sure, here are 5 papers. I thought, that's amazing. I said, can you summarize them? And it said, sure, here's the summary. I thought, it's incredible. I've not seen some of these. Can you give me the links for them? So it did. And then I looked, and out of the list, out of two of the 5 didn't exist. It just made them up, and none of the links were links to the papers. They were, I think, one was they were links to, research papers in biochemistry or engineering, and they were nothing to do with psychology. So it's early days. I think it feels like the Wild West at the moment. But I also think that we have no idea how this thing is going to affect us. If you think back to when we first got access to the internet, and we didn't know how things were going to map out for the next few decades. Well, now I think we have no idea how things are going to map out for the next few months. This thing is moving so quickly. It's I think it's amazing. And I also think that a lot of people will try it, and they're trying it for quite bland, quite banal tasks. And it's a bit like when we first got access to Google Earth, this amazing technology that had photographed everywhere on Earth, and we go online and we go, right, I can see anywhere in the whole world. What am I going to look at? I know, I'll see what my house looks like from outside.
That's it.
It's
That's
like,
it.
I think that's what we're doing now with this, and it's very, very early days, but very exciting times. My advice would be use it as a digital intern, and remember, it doesn't really know anything, doesn't know you, but you can still get it to do a lot of the kind of legwork for you before you finalize your report, and before you use it as a research assistant, but carefully. Don't a research assistant who is only started in the job today, and may not have the brilliant attention span. So
Yeah.
but I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think to myself, how much of text are we going to be reading 6 months from now that's AI generated? That's and will we know? That's the other thing.
We won't know. We
Yeah.
won't know. You can say, write me, rewrite this in the style of the New York Times, and it will do it. And you look at it and go, yeah, it sounds about right. And especially as I said, we tend to skim things. I think
Yeah.
that's the real danger. Is that even its plain vanilla style, it's out of the box style is dangerous, because it's unremarkable, because it's average.
Yeah.
It would just it's like, oh yeah, it looks about right. Yeah, nothing remarkable. And so I think it's yeah, it has a lot of implications, certainly for the spread of misinformation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I think these are very exciting times, and one thing's for sure, we can't ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, I keep thinking about how it's going to be used and what are the potential. Like I put in there, give me 10 tweets on transformational leadership. And I look through the list, I'm like, that's pretty good,
Yeah.
like you said, a lot of plain vanilla stuff, but real good, fundamental stuff about transformational leadership. And so I wonder how much, poor Elon Musk, right? How much is Twitter going to be just AI generated tweets?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't feel too sorry for him, since he's got a big stake in OpenAI as well. It's kind of
Right.
but yeah, absolutely. And of course, Microsoft have licensed, or done a big deal with OpenAI to create to kind of to merge it with Bing. I mean, you don't say I'm going to Bing something, do you? It's
No.
it's not something that has obviously Google is dominant in search, but I just wonder if the whole world of search will be turned upside down if
Yeah.
if Bing starts incorporating ChatGPT, which it will do. And so you can imagine that instead of getting a list of links, you'll get a summary of something, and which is and it's just scraped it from lots of web pages. It's
Yeah.
kind of if you're a creator, that's kind of worrying, if you're not
Yeah.
credited.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that goes. And then Google are not far behind, because they obviously see the danger, and they've got their chat bot called Bard, and so they're going to be doing the same thing. And I think, well, if they're incorporating Bard, if they're incorporating artificial intelligence in their search results, then can't be long before they start incorporating it in Google Docs as well. So
Yeah.
my guess is that maybe we'll start seeing pretty soon. We'll start seeing this in word processing software. And I
Yeah.
mentioned
Yeah.
mentioned Microsoft. Of course, they've got Microsoft Word. So it's I think things are about to change dramatically.
Wow. Yeah, I really do. And I think, because I think I think I talked to you, I'm working on my doctorate right now. And so I imagine universities are in a panic, right? How much are they going to be able to tell, right now they have all these plagiarism tools. They can check to see, okay, how much of your paper, what percentage is potentially from other sources. Well, now if you've got an AI generated text, how are they going to tell? How much it's like, again, the to be able to check for cheating is going to be a whole nightmare for, I would say, the whole university system, I would imagine.
It's an arms race. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
it's you're right. These things pass a plagiarism check. You
yeah,
put them in and it
yeah,
says, yeah. And the reason is they are original, because it's just predicting. It's just coming up with a word, coming up with another word, coming up with a sentence. It's actually making it up as it goes along. So it's never, it is original, as far as I know. But it's kind of, maybe it's using chunks of text. I don't know. But and that's the other thing. We don't actually know how
yeah,
it's creating these things, how it's created everything it's written.
yeah, yeah.
We don't know where it's got its information from. We don't know if it's made it up. Um, and there's at least one, just a few weeks ago, a developer released a check for AI generated text. And I think there have been several released since then. But as far as I know, it's not 100%. And it also gives false positives as well. So you could have something that
Mm,
you've written and it marks it up as AI generated. So yeah, I mean, it's I know, in New York schools banned ChatGPT um, pretty quickly. That was several weeks ago. Um, I don't know. You're dealing with kids, and you're trying to, if you're trying to outsmart kids when it comes to the use of tech, it's like, yeah, good luck with that. Let me know how that goes. And I know other exam boards over here in the UK, or universities. I don't think the exam boards have caught up yet, but universities are starting to say to move away from essays as part of the coursework, as a way as a way of gauging knowledge, because it was bad before when you could just pay someone to write an essay. Now you can get ChatGPT to do it for nothing in seconds. It's I think it's just turned so many things on
yeah.
their head.
I absolutely. I'm glad we've had this conversation, and leaders who are listening in. I mean, this is something that, as you said, Rob, it's going to be changing over the next several months, and you got to be aware of this and to be aware of how it potentially could impact your business, right? From a good and a bad side. Are there ways that you could potentially use it to save time and effort or to help you, remind you of things. I was thinking, like, if you're trying to generate um sales copy on a new product, you might throw it in there and just see what comes out of it. It's like, oh, I didn't even think about this, or like as a way to, you know kind of set a bug in your ears about something that you hadn't thought about before. So there's some good things you could use it for, but then also, what are the things that potentially could be a risk to your business as well? I think it's just something you need to be aware of and need to follow it. And when you hear the words chat gpt, you should probably pay attention, at least in the next year or so, because I think things are changing pretty fast.
Yeah, they really are. And I think, we could be scared of it. We can try and ignore it, or we can embrace it. It's not going away. I think it could be a good thing in many ways. If it relieves you from the grunt work, if you like, the crappy first draft that you have to write of your report. If it will get you to that point more quickly, and then you can edit it and you can rewrite it, then it's got to be a good thing. And it kind of elevates your position as a leader, because you're no longer there burning the midnight oil on creating this first draft,
Yeah, yeah,
or on just assembling things, just assembling an outline of your report. I think what we will do is we will learn to use it, and this is something I'm very much focusing on now, as saying, how can we get people to use this technology, so that it puts them back in the driving seat, but it relieves them of the stuff they didn't want to do and frees them up for the real thought leadership, and for so you become a director, not not you're not your own intern. You're not somebody who has to do the stuff on a Sunday night. I think it has great potential, but you need to view it as, you need to be the director, the master of the AI, And that I think is going to be the way forward. A bit like autopilots in planes.
Yeah.
You still want a pilot. You still need you can't just leave it completely, and you need to know how to fly the plane. And it's a human in control, and lament it. It's a bit like lamenting the end of calligraphy as a skill. It's kind of
Right.
like, well,
Right.
I've spent all this time learning calligraphy, and now this printing press comes along, and I don't have to do that. It's like, yeah, but think of all the things you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's learning to embrace it and get it to work for you is the
Yeah.
key here. And I'm certainly doing a lot of work on that, and will be reporting
Interesting.
back.
Yeah, and I like what you said. Some don't trust everything that's coming out of it. I mean, I think we've grown to know that, like with Wikipedia, right? If you look something up quickly, you can get quick information on Wikipedia on just about any topic, right? But you never take that to the bank. You sort of look at secondary sources and what have you. So I think it's similar. It's a piece of technology. It has its limitations, but it can give you some quick information quick, and then you need to, but don't copy paste, and that's life, right? So you put the human element in there, just like you said, with a pilot on autopilot, you've got a human there that's watching over it, and I think you need to watch over it as well.
I've got it absolutely. There's one note of caution I really must sound, actually, which is that it's not confidential at the moment. ChatGPT even warns you. It says, look, the researchers might see this. We're using this is experimental. We're using it to
Yeah.
develop the
Yeah.
model. So don't put confidential information in there. And that certainly rules out its use in a corporate environment. And it's the I think that it will be a while before we see it adopted. Corporates are usually the last to adopt new technology anyway, because their computer systems have to be locked down so much more than for small businesses. But yeah, it's not just be careful about what it churns out. Be careful about what you put in as well.
Great advice. Great advice. Wow. Really good. That's the first discussion on it. And I've been playing with it as well. And my brain is, kind of on overload. Is like, okay, what does this mean for the future? What does it mean for our businesses? What does it mean for, just like we're talking about academics in the future? It's just a lot of things to think about. So, but again, the best thing to do right now is to be informed. Stay, if you see articles, if you see people talking about it, it's good to keep an ear to it, because this is definitely an evolving issue that we have to, as leaders, keep an eye on for sure. So, what are you working on these days?
Well, I was working on my book, but right now I'm spending a lot of time on social media for good
Yeah.
or bad. What I'm really trying to do, particularly on LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn at the moment, is trying to create original content that raises awareness of the importance of the written word, and it helps people apply the insights from psychology and neuroscience that I've been uncovering. So, for people who didn't hear the first interview, I spend all my time delving into academic research, into how we read, and then trying to help people apply that in the workplace, because it's outside of academia, most of the stuff hasn't really had an airing, and there's an awful lot of stuff that is in leadership training, dare I say it, and certainly on social media, that's is kind of not strictly accurate, and sometimes it's just not right at all, and flies in the face of the evidence. So I'm trying to raise awareness of that and trying to redress the balance. And yeah, it's kind of that I'm spending a lot of time on there. I'm very active on LinkedIn, just trying to move the conversation forward. If anybody wants to connect with me, then they should definitely feel free to reach out, or just follow, because it's about having a two-way conversation, and just trying to move us forward on this. And I think there's so much, once people start applying this, once they know about it, a lot of things become a lot easier. Now,
Yeah.
as you know, books take a long time to write and publish. I'm putting this stuff out there now. So that's my main focus is LinkedIn.
Excellent. Okay. And how can people find you and find out more about you, your company, and anything else?
On LinkedIn, I'm Rob Ashton one. If you just put Rob Ashton, you should find me because I'm quite active. Rob Ashton UK, if that doesn't bring it up. The writing skills training company you mentioned, Emphasis, is very active. So there's a lot of stuff on the website there. It's got an excellent blog. There's a lot of information people can get there totally free, as well as find out about training, of course. And that's just simply writing-skills.com. And there's my website, which is robashton.com. And I have a free course, which is audio and text-based for obvious reasons, where I talk about this brain science and applying it to writing. That's just robashton.com.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for those resources. Leaders, this is a lot of good stuff here. We do spend a lot of time writing, and we do spend a lot of time reading. And I think what Rob is helping us understand is where there's oftentimes we miss things. Translation, it's missed. The message is missed, even when we spend a lot of time thinking about it. So I really encourage you to check out his resources, dig a little deeper in here, and understand the power of the written word. It's not as easy as you think. It's not as straightforward as you think. Our brains are still working to understand it. We've only been doing this for what, 5,000 years? Is that what you said, Rob?
A mere 5,000 years.
Yeah, and it takes millions of years to really to learn a skill, and we're just in that early stages of that. So really take a look at his resources. And again, I encourage leaders that to start thinking about the written word more than what you think might be obvious. So, Rob, thanks for coming back on the show. Thanks for sharing all this, and again, and thanks for kind of getting us to start thinking about this ChatGPT and what that might be doing in the world. So, and I know it's new to you, it's new to me, it's new to everyone, but I think you've given us some things to think about, and I really do appreciate that.
Thanks, John. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.